My name is Samantha Green. I'm 30 years old. When I lost my job and begged my family for help, they cut me loose, called me dead weight, and slammed the door in my face. But when my brother was arrested and their perfect world collapsed, suddenly I was the one they needed. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. My story begins in a house that was always filled with noise, but never with the sound of my name. We lived on a quiet, tree-lined street in Denver, Colorado. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. My father, Harold, was a manager at a local hardware supplier. My mother, Linda, was a homemaker who prided herself on her garden and her son. And that son was Ryan, my older brother. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting him, reflecting his light. From the moment he was born, Ryan was a star. He was loud, charming, and fearless. He had bright blue eyes and a smile that made people forgive him for anything, and they always did. I was the opposite. I was quiet, observant, and cautious. I had my father's steady brown eyes and a nature that preferred books to baseballs. In our family, that made me an afterthought. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. All I wanted was a chocolate cake with pink frosting roses and a new set of watercolor paints. I'd been talking about it for weeks. The day arrived, and my mother had made the cake exactly as I'd asked. A few of my friends from school came over. For about an hour, I was the center of attention. I was just about to open my presents when Ryan, who was 12, came running into the backyard. He was holding his arm at a strange angle. "Mom! Dad! I think I broke it!" he yelled, his face twisted in pain. Instantly, everything stopped. My party, my birthday, my moment, it all vanished. My parents rushed to his side, his face a mask of concern. My mother was already grabbing the car keys. My friends stood around awkwardly as my parents fussed over Ryan, their voices a flurry of panicked whispers. They didn't even say goodbye to my guests. They just loaded Ryan into the car and sped off to the emergency room, leaving me standing in the backyard next to a pile of unopened presents and a half-eaten cake. It turned out his arm was just sprained. He'd fallen off his bike trying to do a trick. When they got home hours later, Ryan was milking it for all it was worth, wearing a sling and a brave little smirk. My father ruffled his hair and said, "That's my tough guy." My mother made him his favorite dinner. My birthday was completely forgotten. Later that night, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water and heard my brother laughing with his friend on the phone. "Yeah, it barely even hurts, but I got out of cleaning the garage and Mom's making me cookies." He hadn't stolen my day by accident. He had done it on purpose. And the worst part was, it worked. My parents never noticed. This pattern repeated itself throughout our lives. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my mother would pin it to the fridge with a nod and say, "That's nice, dear." But when Ryan managed to pull a C+ up from a D in history, my dad would order pizza for the whole family to celebrate. "See, Samantha," he'd say, clapping Ryan on the back. "That's what real effort looks like. Your brother never gives up." They didn't see my consistent, quiet effort. They only saw his loud, dramatic struggles and last-minute victories. My success was expected and invisible. His mediocrity was a triumph. The final straw of my childhood came the day I got my acceptance letter to the University of Colorado. I was bursting with pride. I'd worked tirelessly, staying up late to study, joining the debate club, doing everything I could to build a future for myself. I ran into the living room, waving the thick envelope. "I got in! I'm going to college!" I announced. My father looked up from his newspaper, a frown on his face. "College? What for? You'll just end up getting married and having kids. Seems like a waste of good money." "We can't afford that, Samantha," my mother added, not even looking up from the sweater she was knitting. "Besides, Ryan needs a new car to get to his job at the dealership. He can't keep driving that old thing." Their words were like a physical blow. They weren't just dismissing my achievement, they were telling me that my future was less important than my brother's convenience. They saw a university education for me as a frivolous expense, but a new car for him as a necessity. That night, I locked myself in my room and filled out financial aid and student loan applications with tears blurring my vision. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. I was in a house full of people, but I was completely on my own. I got the loans, I won a small scholarship, and I promised myself that one day I would build a life so stable and so successful that I would never, ever have to ask them for a single thing. I kept that promise for a long time. I went to college and worked 3 jobs to stay there. I was a waitress at a greasy diner, a stalker at the campus library, and I cleaned dorm rooms on weekends. I was perpetually exhausted, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination. When I finally graduated with a degree in business administration and a specialization in human resources, I felt like I had conquered a mountain. I moved into a small but clean apartment and landed a good job at a mid-sized tech company in Denver. For the first time in my life, I felt secure. I had my own space, my own income, my own life. I kept my distance from my family. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, our conversations polite but shallow. They never asked about my work, and I never offered details. It was easier that way. In their eyes, Ryan was the real success story. He had worked his way up to being the top salesman at the car dealership, was always driving a flashy new demo car, and told grand stories about the big deals he was closing. My quiet, steady corporate job couldn't compete with that. I was okay with that. I wasn't trying to compete anymore. I was just trying to be free. Then, the floor fell out from under me. The tech industry hit a rough patch. Our company, which had seemed so stable, announced a major restructuring. My entire department was eliminated. I was called into a sterile conference room on a Friday afternoon, handed a thin folder with my severance details, and told to have my desk cleared out by 5 o'clock. I walked out of that building in a daze, carrying a cardboard box with a potted plant, a few books, and a coffee mug. I thought I would find another job quickly. I was wrong. The market was flooded with people just like me. I sent out hundreds of resumes. I tailored cover letters. I networked until I was sick of the sound of my own voice. Weeks turned into months. My severance package ran out. My savings dwindled, eaten away by rent, bills, and groceries. Soon I was counting loose change to buy a loaf of bread. The first eviction notice felt like a public shaming. The bright orange paper taped to my door screamed my failure to the entire world. I took it down, my hands shaking, and knew I was out of options. That's when I made the phone call I had sworn I would never make. I dialed my mother's number, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and humiliation. "Mom?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's me." "Samantha, we were just talking about you. Ryan just won a sales competition. He gets a trip to Hawaii. Isn't that wonderful?" I closed my eyes. Of course. "That's great, Mom," I managed to say. "Listen, the reason I'm calling is I'm in a really tough spot. I lost my job a few months ago, and I haven't been able to find anything. I'm about to be evicted." The line went silent. The breeziness was gone. I could picture her face, the cheerful smile replaced by a tight, annoyed frown. "I just need a little help," I pressed on, my voice cracking. "A small loan, just to cover my rent for a month or two, until I can get back on my feet. I swear I'll pay back every penny with interest." A long, weary sigh traveled through the phone. It was the sound of a mother burdened by her disappointing child. "Samantha, we can't keep bailing you out. You're 30 years old. You need to grow up and learn to stand on your own 2 feet." The accusation stung. Bailing me out? I had never, not once, asked for their financial help. I had paid for my entire education, I had bought my own car, I had furnished my own apartment. This was the first time, the only time. I could hear Ryan's booming voice in the background. "What's up with Sammy?" he must have asked. I heard my mother mutter a short explanation. Then I heard his laugh. It was a sound that had haunted my childhood, a laugh that always came at my expense. He grabbed the phone. "Hey, Sammy," he said, his tone dripping with condescending amusement. "Tough break. Maybe you should stop being lazy for once and just get a job. They're out there if you actually look." Lazy. That one word shattered what little composure I had left. The sleepless nights I'd spent working and studying, the endless hours I'd spent applying for jobs, facing rejection after rejection, the shame of watching my bank account drain to zero. And he called me lazy? Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sharp. I couldn't speak. "We can't help you, Samantha," my mother said, taking the phone back. Her voice was final. "It's for your own good. This will teach you to be more responsible." The line went dead. I stood there in my silent apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. They hadn't just said no. They had judged me, shamed me, and dismissed me. They had called me a lazy, irresponsible child. I was evicted a week later. A kind friend from college, Sarah, let me sleep on her couch. I crammed my life into a few boxes and stored them in her dusty garage. Every morning, I'd wake up before she and her boyfriend did, folding my blanket neatly, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I spent my days at the public library, using their free internet to continue my hopeless job search. At night, I would lie on that lumpy couch, staring at the unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling, and cry silent tears of humiliation. I felt like a ghost. I had lost my job, my home, my independence, and the last shred of hope that my family might actually care about me. I was at rock bottom, and there was no one to catch me. After a few weeks of this, I decided to try one last time, just one more. Maybe my dad would be different. Maybe without my mother and Ryan there, he would show some compassion. I called him during his lunch break, praying I would get him alone. "Dad?" I said, my voice weak. "Samantha," he replied, his tone clipped and professional, as if I were a business associate he didn't have time for. "Dad, please," I begged, abandoning all pride. "I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. I have nothing left. I'm skipping meals to save money. I just need a little help to get by." There was a pause. I heard the crinkle of a sandwich wrapper. "Listen," he said, and his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. It was completely devoid of emotion. "We told you. We can't carry you anymore. We have Ryan to think about." We have Ryan to think about. Those 6 words echoed in the empty space where my heart used to be. They had their successful son, the one who won trips to Hawaii, to think about. They couldn't be burdened with their failure of a daughter. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't about teaching me responsibility. It was a choice. They had chosen him, and in doing so, they had completely and utterly discarded me. I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was empty. That night, lie on the couch, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always craved their approval, that had yearned for their love, finally died. It was a quiet, painful death. And in its place, a tiny, hard ember of determination began to glow. I would not be their victim. I would not be their failure. I would survive this, and I would do it alone. The next morning, I woke up, and for the first time in months, I didn't go to the library to look for an HR job. I went online and applied for anything and everything. I got a job a week later. It was a low-paying, clerical position at a massive shipping warehouse on the industrial side of town. My job was to sit in a tiny, windowless cubicle and perform mind-numbing data entry for 8 hours a day. It was soul-crushing work, but it was a paycheck. With my first 2 checks, I rented a tiny room in a shared house far from my old neighborhood. The room was barely big enough for a bed and a small desk, but it was mine. The lock on the door felt like the greatest luxury in the world. My life became a simple, grueling routine. Wake up, take the bus to work, stare at a computer screen, take the bus home, eat a can of soup for dinner, sleep. But the evenings were mine. Instead of watching TV or zoning out, I went back to the library, not as a desperate job seeker, but as a student. I had decided that I would never again be at the mercy of a single company or a volatile job market. I needed a skill, a real, marketable skill that was in high demand. I stumbled upon the world of financial auditing and compliance. It was a field built on rules, logic, and precision. It was about ensuring companies followed the law. It was about finding the truth in a sea of numbers. It resonated with the part of me that was orderly and craved justice. So, I studied. Every single night, I sat in a quiet corner of the library with a stack of borrowed textbooks. I taught myself accounting principles, regulatory laws, and auditing techniques. I watched free online courses taught by university professors. I filled notebooks with meticulous notes. My brain, which had felt foggy with depression for so long, started to feel sharp again. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. My eyes burned from staring at text. My body ached with exhaustion. There were nights I'd fall asleep at my desk and wake up with a page stuck to my cheek. But every time I felt like giving up, I would hear my dad's voice in my head. "We have Ryan to think about." That memory was fuel. It was a cold, sharp-edged motivation that never faded. I was not just building a future. I was building a fortress. After a year of this relentless pace, I saved enough money to take the certification exam for a certified fraud examiner. I walked into the testing center feeling a strange mix of terror and calm. For hours, I answered questions, my mind focused and clear. A few weeks later, an email arrived. I opened it with trembling hands. I had passed. I sat in my tiny room and cried, but this time the tears were not of sorrow or shame. They were tears of relief and pride. I had done it. Me. Alone. I celebrated by buying a single perfect cupcake from a fancy bakery and eating it slowly, savoring every bite. It was the taste of victory. That certification changed everything. It was a key that unlocked a new door. I quit the data entry job and got an entry-level position as a junior compliance analyst at a small investment firm. The pay was better. The work was challenging. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a professional world that valued my brain. Slowly, brick by painstaking brick, I built my new life. I earned another certification, then another. I was promoted to compliance officer. I was known for my sharp eye and my unwavering integrity. I moved out of the rented room and into my own one-bedroom apartment in a nice, safe building. I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand. I took a vacation to the mountains, just because I could. During these years, the silence from my family was absolute. They never called. I never called. It was as if we lived on different planets. I saw glimpses of their life on social media, through mutual friends. There was Ryan, always smiling, standing next to a new sports car or on a boat. There were my parents, looking proud, standing beside him. According to the world, they had made the right choice. Their son was a high-flying success. I was just the quiet daughter who had faded into the background. I was fine with that. Their world held nothing for me anymore. My life was calm, orderly, and most importantly, it was mine. I was safe inside the fortress I had built for myself. I thought nothing could ever breach its walls. Then, one Tuesday evening, my phone rang. The call came on a crisp autumn evening. I was in my kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad, listening to a podcast. The number on my screen was my mother's. I hadn't seen it in almost 5 years. My heart gave a strange, painful jolt, a phantom limb aching for a connection that no longer existed. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a morbid curiosity made me slide my thumb across the screen. "Hello?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Sammy, Samantha, oh, thank God you answered." It was my mother, but her voice was ragged, frantic, stripped of all its usual cheerful superiority. It was the voice of pure panic. "Mom?" I said, setting the knife down on the cutting board. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "It's Ryan. It's your brother. He's been arrested, Sammy. The police came to his office. They came to his house. They took him away in handcuffs." I sank onto a kitchen stool, my legs suddenly weak. Arrested? Golden boy Ryan? The star of the family? It felt impossible, like hearing the sun had been arrested for shining too brightly. Arrested for what? I asked, my mind struggling to process the information. "Fraud!" She wept, her words tumbling over each other. "Embezzlement! Something about his investment business. They said he stole money, Sammy. A lot of money. His clients, His face is going to be on the news. Your father and I, we don't know what to do. Our world is ending." It turned out that Ryan's success story was a work of fiction. The car dealership job was just a stepping stone. He had left it years ago to start his own investment firm. He used his charm and my parents' social connections to attract clients, mostly retirees and friends of the family who trusted him. He promised them huge returns on exclusive real estate deals. But the deals were fake. The projects didn't exist. He was running a classic Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay off the old ones, all while siphoning off huge amounts for himself. The new sports cars, the fancy vacations, the expensive dinners, it was all paid for with stolen money. And now the house of cards had collapsed. Their perfect son wasn't a success. He was a criminal. Suddenly, my phone, which had been silent from them for years, began to burn with their desperation. They called me day and night. They left long, rambling voicemails filled with tears and pleas. "You work in finance now, Sammy," my mother's voice pleaded from my voicemail one morning. "You understand all this legal stuff. You can help him. You can find a loophole, a mistake they made. Please, Sammy, you have to fix this. He's your brother." "Samantha, this is your father," said another message, his voice strained and shaky. "Your mother is a wreck. We need you. We need your help to navigate this. You owe it to your family." Owe it to my family. The audacity of that statement left me breathless. The same people who had told me I was a burden, who had cut me loose without a second thought, now believed I owed them something. They weren't calling to apologize for the past. They weren't calling to see if I was okay. They were calling because their world was on fire and they saw me as a fire extinguisher. My skills, the very skills I had been forced to acquire because of their neglect, were now their only hope. The final, most desperate call came from my father late one night. "Sammy, please," he whispered, his voice broken. I could hear the echo of a man who had lost everything. "We were wrong, okay? We know we were wrong about everything. We're so sorry. But he's our son, your brother. If you don't help us, Ryan's life is over. They're talking about years in prison. Years." I listened to it all in a state of cold detachment. The emotional, needy girl who would have crumbled under their pleas was long gone. In her place was a woman who saw the situation for what it was. A transaction. They had something they wanted from me. my expertise, my time, my effort. And what were they offering in return? A history of neglect and a crisis that was not my own. After 3 days of the relentless calls, I made up my mind. I sent my father a short, simple text message. I will meet you tomorrow, 10 a.m., at the Central Police Precinct. I drove to the station the next morning, my hand steady on the steering wheel. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I felt calm, resolved. I walked into the cold, sterile building that smelled of bleach and despair. My parents were huddled together on a hard plastic bench, looking small and old. My mother's face was puffy and pale, her eyes red-rimmed. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. When they saw me, they practically ran to me. My mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my coat. "Oh, Sammy, thank you for coming," she sobbed. "We're so sorry, Samantha," said my father, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. We should have been there for you." The apology hung in the air between us, thin and transparent. It was an apology born of desperation, not genuine remorse. An apology they were only giving because they needed me. I gently removed my mother's hand from my arm. "Where is the paperwork?" I asked, my voice cool and professional. "I want to see the case file." My father, looking relieved that I was taking charge, handed me a thick folder. I took it, found an empty bench away from them, and began to read. For the next half hour, I was no longer their daughter. I was a compliance officer reviewing a case. And the case was damning. It was all there, laid out in meticulous detail, forged documents, falsified bank statements, a clear and undeniable trail of deceit. Ryan hadn't just made a mistake. He had orchestrated a calculated, predatory scheme against people who trusted him. He had stolen the life savings of elderly couples. He had betrayed friends. As I read, any lingering shred of familial pity I might have felt for him evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't a tragedy. This was a reckoning. My parents watched my face, their own faces etched with desperate, pathetic hope. They saw my focus and mistook it for strategy. They thought I was there to search for a defense, a weakness in the prosecution's case. They thought I was there to save them. Finally, I closed the folder. The sharp snap of the cover echoed in the quiet waiting area. I stood up and walked back over to them. "Well," my father asked, his voice trembling with anticipation, "is there anything you can do? A lawyer you can recommend? A strategy?" I looked at my mother, her tear-streaked face pleading with me. I looked at my father, his eyes begging for a miracle from the daughter he had once written off. I took a deep breath, the sterile air filling my lungs. "There's nothing I can do," I said. My voice was quiet, even, and devoid of emotion. He made his choices. The silence that followed was heavier than any words I could have spoken. I watched the hope drain from their faces, replaced by a slow, creeping wave of disbelief, then shock, and finally a dawning, horrified understanding. They were realizing, for the very first time, that I was not going to fix this. I was not going to clean up Ryan's mess. I was not their dutiful daughter, rushing in to save the day. My father's face turned red with anger. "What do you mean you can't do anything?" he sputtered. "After everything we've done for you?" The question was so absurd, so completely detached from our reality, that a small, cold smile touched my lips. I looked him directly in the eye. "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated, my voice still quiet. "You did nothing. You turned your back on me when I was about to be homeless. You called me a lazy burden. The life I have, the skills you're begging me to use, I built all of it myself. Not just without your help, but because of your cruelty. That was my motivation." My silence and my calm, factual statements were more powerful than shouting ever could have been. They finally saw me. Not as the second-place child or the family failure, but as a stranger, a woman who had been forged in a fire they had set and who had walked out of it made of something stronger than they could comprehend. They finally understood that their golden son was broken and their forgotten daughter was unbreakable. I didn't stay to watch them crumble. I simply turned and walked away. I walked out of the police station, out into the bright, cold sunlight, and I did not look back. In the end, I chose peace, not revenge. I didn't participate in the investigation or the trial. I didn't interview to the press, who had a field day with the story of the charismatic local boy turned con artist. I simply recused myself from the situation entirely. I did not help my brother, but I did not actively hurt him either. I left him to the consequences of his actions. Ryan was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal prison. His name was disgraced. The money was gone. My parents had to sell their home to help pay for his legal fees and some of the restitution owed to his victims. Their perfect world hadn't just collapsed, it had been pulverized. I continued with my life. My career flourished. I was promoted to a senior position at my firm, leading a team of analysts. I was respected for my integrity and my meticulous work. I bought a small condominium with a balcony that overlooked the city. It was my sanctuary, a place of peace that I had earned. My parents still call occasionally. The calls are infrequent and awkward. Our conversations are carefully curated to be about nothing at all. The weather, a new grocery store, the traffic. We never speak of Ryan. We never speak of the past. There is a vast, silent canyon between us, and we both know it's too deep to ever be crossed. During one of these stilted calls, my mother, in a rare moment of what might have been genuine emotion, said softly, "I hope you can forgive us one day, Samantha." I thought about it for a moment, looking out my window at the city lights twinkling below. "I have already," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. The anger, the bitterness, the deep, aching hurt, it was gone. I had carried it for so long, and at some point, I had simply set it down. Forgiving them wasn't for their benefit. It was for mine. It was the final step in my own liberation. "I've forgiven you," I repeated, my voice clear and calm, "but I will never depend on you again, and you will never use me again." That was my final word on the matter. It was my closure. Not a fiery confrontation, but a quiet, unshakable boundary. My strength was no longer defined by their approval or disapproval. It was defined by my own survival, my own resilience, my own hard-won peace. They could no longer hurt me because I no longer needed anything from them.